Hello guys, this is Astocky here and welcome to a video on how to install a Tekkit 3.1.3 server. It updated yesterday, so I thought I'd do this quick update video, and by quick I mean it's probably going to be half an hour or so. There's a lot to cover and I want to make sure that I've covered everything that's in the previous videos so that this video can be watched standalone and people will still know everything they need to know about installing a Tekkit server. So to start with, make sure you've got annotations turned on. If there's anything that gets noticed by anyone in the comments or I pick anything else up, I'm going to add it as an annotation to the video. This is the last video the Tekkit team, this is the last server the Tekkit team is going to make, which makes this the last video that's going to be made until Tekkit 4 is released, which with the way Minecraft is going at the moment, with it updating kind of every week at the moment, it's going to be a while before they get a stable enough build that they can start to develop a new server on. So 3.1.3 is going to be it for quite some time. So now that I've said turn on the annotations, make sure you watch the video. I get lots of comments on this how to create Tekkit videos by people who haven't watched the video, and it frustrates me. Next thing, if you have a problem and you want to ask for help, I'm happy to help. Those who've seen my previous videos know that I respond to pretty much every comment that gets made, but you need to tell me where you got up to in the video when you found the problem, what did you do just before the problem happened, and what does it say as an error message. If you don't tell me those things, it's really difficult for me to help you, and it's quite frustrating when people just tell me that it didn't work. Okay, now that I've said that, I've got one more thing to say. Don't post links to Tekkit videos or ask about cracked Tekkit or cracked clients. I don't help either of those things, and if I see people doing them, I ban them so they can't post any more comments, and that pretty much means they can't get any help from me. So now that I've done that, the first thing that you're going to need to do is you are going to need to check what version of Windows you have. Now there's a couple of ways to do this. The easiest one is to click on the Start menu, right click on My Computer and go to Properties, and this window will come up that shows you information about your computer. So you can see if we look down a little bit, it says 64-bit operating system. Now if that doesn't work for you for some reason, there's another way you can do it. You can go to Start menu as well, type in CMD and press enter, or if you're using Windows XP you'll have to go to Run, and that will open up a command prompt. Now there's this command that you can type in, which is wmic space os space get space os architecture, which is wmic space os space get space os architecture, and then press enter and it will tell you what you have. In my case I have a 64-bit architecture. That's very important for the next step, because the next step is to actually you'll pretty much need to have that command window open anyway, so I'll reopen that command prompt window. The next thing you're going to need to do is type Java space version, and in my case you can see that I have Java version 1.7.0 underscore 09, and then on this line here it says 64-bit. Now if you have a 64-bit architecture and that line there does not say 64-bit, that means you have only got 32-bit Java installed, and that can be a problem. Now here that 1.7 means I have Java 7. Now if it says 1.6 point anything, that means you need to update your Java. The current latest version as of making this video is underscore 09. It's not particularly important to have the latest Java, but it is important to make sure that you have Java 7. So go to a Google window and type install Java 7 runtime update, and that should take you to the Oracle website. And if you click on the Oracle website, it will give you the Java 7 download. Now there's a couple of different ways you can do this. I find that the best way, it's not the only way, but the best way is just to type Wikipedia Java update, and the very first link should be Java version history, and then a little bit down the page you can see Java 7, and it will tell you what the latest version is. So you can see as of here, which is the 16th of October, update 9 is the latest. Like I said, it doesn't really matter, but if when you do your Google search you type update 9, it will make sure that it gives you the link to the correct update 9. Like I said, it's really not important as long as it's Java 7 point something. So once you've got to that web page, you can see that by what I'm doing just here, it says you have the recommended version. What that does though, which is the very first link, is it only checks Java within your browser. So if you have a 64-bit operating system, that will only give you the 32-bit Java, and that's not what you need. So that's why the one to click on is the one that says Java SE downloads. Now when you get to the download page, we want this one here, which is Java SE 7 U9. We want the JRE, not the JDK, because we want the runtime, not the development kit. When you click on download, it will take you to the page to get the very latest version. Now for Windows, you can either choose the Windows x86 offline or the Windows x86 online. There's no particular difference between the two of them. Generally I pick the offline because then if there's any problems during install or something goes wrong with the install, you've already got it on your computer, you don't have to keep downloading it. Like I said, it's totally up to you. If you're using Windows, make sure you pick the exe version. The tar.gz version might work, but it's just a little bit complicated. And if you have the 64-bit architecture, as you saw before, you need to download the Windows 64-bit version. Now, if you previously had Java 1.6, you have to uninstall Java 6 before you start to install Java 7. Now, it's important to make sure that you get rid of all versions of Java 6 before you have Java 7. So if you're using Windows 7 like I am, it's under Uninstall a Program. And if you scroll down, you can see here I have Java 7 Update 9 and Java 7 64-bit Update 9. It's important to get rid of all Java 6, anything that mentions Java 6, before you start installing Java 7. So once you've installed both of those, and I always suggest installing the x86 version, which is the 32-bit version, and then installing the 64-bit version, then it's time to open up your command prompt window once again and type java-version and make sure it's installed correctly. If at any stage you get a message, like let's say I typed Java Z, if at any stage just type in the normal Java like I did just here, you get this message that says Java is not a recognized as an internal or external command, operable program or batch file. That means you have an issue with your Java. The first thing you need to do is make sure that you have Java installed correctly. And the way to do that is to open up My Computer, go to C drive, go to Program Files, not the x86 one. Make sure you have a file in there called Java, and make sure you have a file in there called JRE that has a bin folder. If you don't have all of those things, that means Java is not installed correctly, and you need to continue to work to make sure that you've got it installed correctly. If you see a JRE6 folder there that has a bin folder in it, that also means you still have Java 6 installed, and you need to get rid of Java 6 before you can install Java 7. Now, assuming you've done that correctly and you've installed it and the folder is there, and you still get that error in the command prompt that says it's not recognized as a program, that means you need to set up a path variable to point to Java. Now, the way that you do that is you just give me 1 second, I'll get myself set up, and then I'll come back and show you. Okay, sorry about that. The way that you do that is once again you right click on My Computer and say Properties, and it'll bring up this window or something looking very similar, and you want to go to Advanced System Settings. I think this is also the standard System Properties window that pops up when you do it with Windows XP, but I'm not 100% sure. But what you want to go to is you want to go to Advanced, and you want to go down to Environment Variables, and then under User Variables you want to create a new user variable, and you want to call it Path, all in capital letters, and then the value you want to set for the variable is the folder we just looked at here, which is program files without the x86, just the regular program files, Java, JRE, bin. So once you're in that folder, you can basically just copy that whole line and then go back to your environment variable and hit paste and then hit OK, and that will create a new user variable called path, because you have your system variable here, but that will create a new user variable called path, so you're not messing with your system variables, and it will show you, and it will basically point to your Java, so you won't get that issue. And once again, as with everything that you do, you open your command prompt back up again, and then you type the same thing again, and you make sure that it is now actually giving you the correct message. If you have any problems with doing that, make sure you let me know in the video. Definitely don't play with the system variable path unless you have to. And certainly I would suggest talking to someone before you do that, because otherwise you could end up with things really kind of messing up on you. Okay, so now that we've basically got the correct version of Java and we know that Java's working, now we're ready to go and get the Tekkit files. So I'll close that. Basically, you need to go to the Tekkit Pack website, which is www.technicpack.net/Tekkit, or when you go to the main Technic Pack website, you can click on a little tab that says Tekkit. Now, Tekkit was only released yesterday, so hopefully this will all work. Now, the first thing you will need to do is you will now need to download a new copy of the Technic launcher. Previous versions of the Technic launcher that were available before yesterday may not have Technic 3.1.3 in there because it's so new. So I'll start by doing that. I'll open it in a new tab. So we're now downloading the launcher. You should be sure to get the latest version. Here he comes with the download. I'm going to save that file. I'm going to place it in my games folder, and I'm going to create a new folder called Tekkit. It's pretty important that you put all of your Technic stuff or Tekkit stuff into a new folder. What you don't want to do is go to the location that's in your application data and install it there. That can cause you a lot of problems, and so that's something that I don't suggest doing. I suggest just putting it in somewhere that's completely new and completely free of everything else. The next thing you want to do is click on the file to download the Tekkit Server files. So I'm going to save those in the same location because that's just easy for me. And once it's finished scanning for viruses, I'm going to open the folder. And so you can see here I now have Technic Launcher and Tekkit Server. Now, the way I launch the Technic Launcher is I use a batch file to do that. This is completely optional, but if you want to do it the way that I do it, basically what it does is it creates it here in this folder and makes it all self-contained. So I can post the script for this batch file if anyone's interested, but basically this is all completely optional, and I'm actually going to pause the video while I write it. I'm going to come back once it's done. Okay, so like I said, this is completely optional, but I like to do it this way because I find things are just a bit easier when I do it like this, because it will basically run everything out of this folder. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to unzip this folder into a new folder, and I like to use 7-zip, but whatever archive program you use, again, like I said, just make sure you put it into a new folder, and I find it's easiest if you put it into a new folder that has the same name as the zip file. I find that causes the least amount of problems. So now I will double click on it. Now that we have done this and we have all of the Tekkit server files that we need, you can see that it doesn't have a lot of the files that are needed to run the server. It has all the basics, but not all of them. Most of those files will only be set up and configured once you run the server and it works correctly. But before I do that, now that you know whether you have a 32-bit or a 64-bit operating system, you also need to know how much memory you have. So the easiest way is to press Alt-Control-Delete and bring up your Task Manager. And once you have the Task Manager open, you can see here under Physical Memory, it'll tell you how much total memory you have. So I have 16 gig of memory. Now, if you have 4 gigabytes of RAM, or you have a 32-bit operating system, you need to right click on launch.bat and say edit, and change this value here and this value here to both be like this, 1 gig, 1 gig. Now if you change both of those to 1 gig and you still get an error when you try and run the server that says not enough space for Java heap, then that means you don't have enough memory to run a Tekkit server. The same thing is generally true for people that have less than 4 gigabytes of RAM. Generally, Tekkit needs about 4 gigabytes to be able to run. Sometimes you'll get lucky and it will work with less. I'm not going to say because I have a 64-bit, and I'm also going to close down the Windows Task Manager because I don't need that open. So now that we've done that, I'm going to run launch.bat. Now before I do that, some people when they first install Java 7 will find that Minecraft will open up just normally, but it'll come up saying that it can't connect to the Minecraft server, like the stream is not available or some area like that. That's generally caused by the Windows firewall blocking Java from connecting to the internet. If that happens, you'll need to go into either your Windows firewall or your normal firewall, and you'll need to tell it that you want to allow Java to have access to the internet. That can sometimes also happen if when you install it, if it tries to create a network and you say that it's a public network, sometimes that can block things as well. It really depends on how you've got your system configured and how strict your firewall settings are. There are also a few people who have I guess you'd call it an internet security or an antivirus that's super strict on things making changes to your computer, and sometimes that can even stop Java from installing correctly. It's a pretty rare case, but normally your antivirus program will have some kind of system configuration defense or something like that will actually say there, if you're installing a new program, make sure you disable this. Norton is one example of that. It's got a certain defense application that it says that you need to disable it if you want to install a program and have it work correctly. But enough of that now. Let's get to the actual running the server for the first time. So we double click here on launch.bat, and you can see that it brings up and it comes up with a whole lot of information, and then it will run, and then it will basically prepare spawn. Now there's a heap of info messages and a heap of warning messages that happen the very first time you run it. Ignore all of that and just wait for it to finish spawn and come up with this message that says done. Now the very next message you can see is creating a Railcraft save file. At this point, and from any point from this time on, do not stop the server by just pressing the X. You always have to stop it by opening up this, which I'm going to refer to as the server console, and typing stop. You can see there that it finishes, it says stopping the server, and then it goes to pause. If you get that pause message any time before it starts to create spawn, that means there's been an error, and I'd like you to tell me this is the point that you got up to in the video, which is about the 17.5 minute. Tell me what you did, and then give me the details of the error message, and I'll help you to fix it. But for now, that's work, so I press spacebar and it goes away. So you can see that now that that's happened, it's created 3 folders called world. Collectively, I'm going to call those 3 folders the world. Now, whatever you name it, it will change the name that it creates, and that's what we're going to go through now. We're going to go through configuring the server.properties. So, by default, server.properties won't have a way of opening it, and something that I completely forgot to mention before, some people will get this same symbol here with the 2 kind of blue gears, but it won't say launch.bat. That's fine, it doesn't need to have the extension shown. It will still work the same way. I've just got file extensions shown. It really makes no difference. So we'll come down to server.properties, and like I said, by default your system won't know how to open this, so you have to right click and you have to say open with. Now when open with comes up, either select WordPad or Notepad, whatever program works for you, and then click OK, and then it will open up. Now once it opens up, you can see that there's a bunch of different lines in here. The one that I would suggest changing is this one here. You can call the world whatever you want. I'm going to call it Tekkit 3.1.3 because that just works for me, and it will help me to identify what the server is. I almost always turn allow flight to true because there are some power items within Tekkit that might give you issues and kick you off the server if you don't do that correctly. Now the next thing that you may want to change, generally I don't do that, is this one here called level seed. That allows you to put a seed in, but remember that once the world is created, if you edit this file and change the level seed after the world's already been created, which, like as an example here, it has already created this world, it will only change the seed for new chunks, which means you'll get discontinuities where there's like giant cliffs and things as it generates the worst of the world differently. Generally I just leave that blank because I don't have any particular favorite seeds, but say you had a certain challenge map or a certain particular seed that you really like that you wanted to use, that's where you would type it in there. Now the next thing you're going to want to look at is the IP value. Now generally leave this blank. The only time you would ever want to change that is if you're using Hamachi, in which case you would want to put the Hamachi IP in that location there. So after you've created a Hamachi network, which I'm not going to show you, that's where you would put the IP in there. If you're port forwarding or playing on a local network or anything else, just leave it blank. It will then automatically assign whatever the most appropriate IP is, and that will save you a whole lot of trouble later on. Now if you try and connect later on in a certain way that I'm going to show you and you get error messages, it's almost always caused by putting an IP there. So basically leave it blank. Pretty much the rest of the server you don't need to change unless you want to. I changed this one here to false because I find that it's just a lot more fun to play Tekkit when everyone's working together, and when you're mining and digging things out you can't accidentally hit each other with picks. Difficulty, you can do whatever you want with that. I believe the difficulty is 1 for easy, 2 for normal, 3 for hard. I don't know if you can do hardcore servers, but I'm assuming that would be a 4. Game mode, you've got 0 or 1 here for creative. Max players is probably the last variable I would change. Now the way this works is you need about 512k of upload connection per player. So if you've got a 1 megabit internet connection, that's 1024k, so that means you can basically have 2 players. If you're got a 3 megabit connection, that means you could have up to 6 players. That's pretty much what that does. I almost always set mine to 5 because I like to keep things kind of small and under control. The rest of them I would not suggest changing, unless of course you want a special thing to pop up here to maybe say it's like Astocky's Tekkit Server. You can change that if you want, but like I said, it makes no real difference. It's just an aesthetic thing if you like that. So I'm now going to save the file, close it down. Now the next thing that you're going to want to have a look at is there are 2 files here, one called ops and one called whitelist. Now if in the server.properties you want to make it a whitelisted server that only certain people can join, you change that value just there to true, and then you have to put the Minecraft username of every person that can access the server into this file here. When the server runs, it will automatically sort them alphabetically for you, but the name needs to be in there and it needs to be typed the same way as they log in with it. If you get that incorrect, the person basically will get banned from the server. The final one that I want to show is this one called ops.txt. Now that's pretty important because if you spawn a world and you generate into the world, by default it has spawn protection on. I think you can turn it off, but I'm not actually sure how to do that. So for example here I'm going to type Astocky, and that's going to make me an op when the server generates, so that I can control my own server and basically be able to access the server console commands from within the Minecraft client. If you don't do that, you have to actually go into the server console once you launch it and set that up. So now I'm going to run launch.bat again, and you can see that it's going to run through, and once again it's going to prepare a new spawn, because this time it's going to create the world with the folder names that I specified, and that's how I like it. Like I said, I'm still going to refer to collectively those 3 files as being your world, because sometimes if something gets corrupt and you have some issues, I might say in the comments to delete your world. It'll be delete those 3 folders and then it'll make it create them again. So you can see here it has done everything and it's now ready to go. So now the server is basically running. It's time to run the Tekkit client and configure it and make sure that it works. Now this console window here that's running is the server. If you close this down, no one will be able to connect to it. So make sure you kind of put it over to one side, but make sure you don't stop it, otherwise you're going to have issues. So now we're going to go back and I'm going to run my batch file, but you can run your Technic launcher, whatever you want to do. Just make sure you have the very latest version. As you can see, this version was only created today. I think if you go to properties, it'll say that it was last. Okay, it hasn't actually remembered that. Now, I don't know if this affects everybody, but it certainly affects me. I've actually got to go into here into security and say unblock this file So you right click, say properties, and then say unblock. It doesn't always happen, but it sometimes happens to me with certain things. So I'm now going to run on launch technics, and it's going to do its thing where it says downloading the launcher and then running. And you can see now that it's created a Technic Launcher folder in there where everything's going to be stored. So now that I have this open, I'm going to, from the drop down box, select Tekkit. I'm then going to put my username in, put my password in, tell it to remember because it's just much easier than typing it in. Now before I hit login, you have to click on options. And the reason for that is by default it selects recommended builds. Now the problem is the recommended build may not always work. In particular right now the server I'm creating is a 3.1.3 server, and you can see that says 3.1.2. So go to manual build selection and pick the particular build of the server that you want, which in this case is 3.1.3 latest. I don't suggest picking always use development builds because there's been a little while for the last few weeks where they've been testing the development build of 3.1.3, but 3.1.3 servers haven't been ready, so that causes issues for people. So pick manual and make sure that you pick the one that matches up with the server version you're running. That's probably not going to be important right now, but in a month or so's time when they start working on the new Tekkit 4, if you've got the Tekkit 4 files, you'll have to make sure that you get the Tekkit 4 client or whatever it is. So I'm going to click OK and then click Login. And so it's going to now download all of the files. Now if at any stage during this you get errors, that normally means you have an outdated version of the Tekkit launcher, and that's going to cause you problems. This will probably take a little while, so while this is doing that, I'm just going to pause the video and I'll come back once this is done. Okay, so you can see now that it has opened up Minecraft, and you can see that it's running Minecraft 1.2.5 and it's running 41 mods. If you're using a 3.1.3 server, you need to have both of those numbers. If it says you're running a different version of Minecraft, or if it says that you're running say 3 or 4 mods, or maybe even 50 or 60 mods, that means you've got a problem. 41 is how many mods you need, or you could have problems. If you ever get an error message that is something to do with, it'll say something like severe, and then you'll have a huge amount of error messages to do with nether ores and a few other different things like that. That probably means you still have Java 6 and you weren't watching at the beginning of the video. But either way, now that we have the server running here and we have the client running the right version, we can now click multiplayer. I'm going to do direct connect because I'm just testing, and I'll type in localhost and then colon 25565. 25565 is whatever the port is, and localhost is what you use to connect to a server where you left the IP blank. If you've put an IP in there, localhost won't work for you, and you'll get an error message saying that it refused connection. The way to fix that is if you're using a Hamachi server and you type in Hamachi IP in your server properties, you need to type the Hamachi IP here. There's also an issue that a number of people get when they're running Hamachi servers where they do everything correctly but their friends can't connect. That is almost exclusively caused by being a firewall issue. If you can connect to the server but your friends can't and you're using Hamachi and everyone's using the same IP, check your firewall and add firewall exceptions generally for Java and for Hamachi. But what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to hit join the server, and you can see in the background it says sending server-side check to Astocky. It came back with no issues. Astocky logging in, everything worked. So here we are. The mouse is inverted, which I think just stinks, but I'm not going to worry about that too much because I'm just going to show. Now you can see that message on the screen that says Matmos is 8 versions late. Don't worry about that or any other kind of errors. That's basically because Tekkit is running on Minecraft 1.2.5 and everything is really out of date. But out of date doesn't mean it's not fun, so just ignore kind of any messages you get in game. If you get a white screen and a whole lot of messages and then it kicks you back to your desktop, or you get errors in the server console, those are things you should post and I'll help you out with the comments. Matmos messages or any other kind of message that says a mod is out of date, don't worry about that. Now I am an op, so you can see I can break blocks here. If I was not an op, I would have to go probably 30 or 40 blocks away from spawn. So any direction, it doesn't really matter. You know, kind of maybe over there near those trees to be able to start breaking blocks. But also because I'm an op, I now have access to the slash commands. So I can type time, and it basically gives me the parameters for how to use it. If I was not an op, it would tell me that I don't have sufficient privileges to do that. So I can also set a new spawn. I can basically use any of the commands, and the way you check the commands is you type help, and it basically tells you all the different commands that you can use as an op. If you're not an op and you try to op yourself, like if I type op Astocky, that works. If I'm not an op and I try to do it, it won't work. You'll have to go back to the server console to do that. But as you can see, everything has worked just correctly for me. I've tested it. So I guess I've talked a little bit about Hamachi. The next thing that I'm going to do is just really briefly talk about port forwarding. Before I do that, I'm going to stop the server. Because like I said, you don't use the X, you stop it correctly. Now, in your server folder, in your server properties, like I mentioned before, Hamachi, put an IP there. Port forwarding, don't put an IP, leave it blank. If you want people to connect, you have to do one or the other. You can't just do nothing and hope that people will be able to connect. Now, port forwarding is probably the best way to do it. It's also the most complicated way. I'm not going to fully explain how to do it, but I will just briefly tell you some important things to know about port forwarding. Now, the first thing is you need to open up a command window, and if you're not going to try and connect with localhost, or if you have the server running on a different PC on your home network, you won't be able to connect using the internet IP. You will have to connect with the local IP. And the way to do that is to open up a command window, type ipconfig, and you can see here the IPv4 address, which in this case is 192.168.0.18. That is the IP that you would have to use to connect to the server. When I connected before with localhost, I could just as easily have put that in, and it knows to connect to this particular PC. Don't try and use the v6 address, and don't try and use any other IP addresses. Now, particularly when you're port forwarding, basically my router automatically every hour that a computer's not connected refreshes all the IP addresses and assigns them on a first come first serve basis. So in an hour's time I could have a completely different IP address. The way to fix that, and it's the very first step in port forwarding, is to log into your router. I'm not going to show you how to do this because every router is different, and port forwarding, like I said, is a bit complicated, but you need to log into your router. You need to find what they call the MAC address, and that's a thing that's specific to the adapter that you're using. So my wireless LAN adapter on this PC will have a certain MAC address that's just specific to this PC, and the way you can find out which one it is I know that I have this IP just here. So if I look on my router login page for this IP, it'll have an address associated beside it. What you basically do is tell your server to always assign that same IP address to that same MAC address, and that will give you what's called a static IP. That's a really important first step. The next thing that you'll need to do is you will need to look at whatever value you have put in here for server port. Leaving it default is generally the easiest, but you might want to change it if you have something else that's using that port, or you might find that that particular port is blocked because of something else that's happening with your internet service provider. Whatever it is, you need to look at that number, and then you need to say in your router port forward page, forward that particular port to the same port and configure it to be the IP address that you just made static before. The third thing that you're going to need to do, and this is more important for other people that connect, is you will need to bring up your internet and you'll need to go to a website. I use ipchicken.com, but pretty much any of the IP websites will work, and that is the IP address that people who are connecting via the internet will need. So in my case, it would be 66190.84.186:25565. That's basically how it works. So once you've port forwarded correctly, you yourself will need to use the local IP address or local host. People from the internet will need to use this IP address. Now, basically the way that you check to see if your port forward is working correctly, I just Google, is my port forward working? And you can go to this website, open port check tool to test port forwarding on your router. And so you can basically go there. So that is your current IP, and it automatically defaults to that. And then you can type in the port. So if I type in 25565 and press check, it will check to see if that port is open. And in my particular case, that's closed. That's because I haven't got my server running in the background because I've closed my server down, and it's also because I've currently got that port forwarded to my laptop, and my laptop's not turned on at the moment because I run my server off my laptop generally. So in your case, what you should do, and I'll put it on HTTP at the moment, which is what browsers use, and again it's come up closed. There's no really good example that you can use, although I think if I use lots of sevens, that might work. No, okay. Basically, all my ports are showing up as blocked at the moment. Don't worry about that too much. For yourself, once you've port forwarded everything correctly, that should work. Like I said, it's not working for me because I don't actually run a Minecraft server off this computer. And that's pretty much everything that I think you're going to need to be able to run a server, to be able to run a client, and to be able to get your friends to connect to it as well. If you have any issues, like I said, feel free to post comments in the video. Just make sure you tell me where you got up to in the video when you had the issue, what did you just do before the issue came up, and what kind of error message does it give you. It probably will also help if you tell me whether you're port forwarding or using Hamachi. So if you can tell me those 4 things, more than happy to help anyone out. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this video not only comprehensive but also really helpful. Astocky out.